Our topic for this morning is a use of tarot to develop personal magnetism. Isn't that a delightful idea? The use of tarot to develop personal magnetism. Of course, first of all, we have to try to understand what we mean by personal magnetism. Personal magnetism is thought of in many ways by many people. Often one person falls in love with another, and the third and fourth and fifth will look on and say, what did he or she see in he or she? In other words, we didn't see whatever personal magnetism is involved for those people to make them succumb to each other's gravitationally attractive forces. And of course, one who does succumb to any individual's so-called personal magnetism can't understand why everybody doesn't see and succumb to this very same emanation. And you have quite a group of reactions that are as different at times as day and night. On the other hand, we do see some people who at least 2/3 of the population will look at and with at least one eyebrow raised say, well, maybe it's the magnetism that got him and or her. Although we're not quite sure what we're meaning by that, are we? It's a good word, and it has a meaning, and intuitively I even think we know what the meaning is. But still, these are the words we use. And then there are times when someone has enough of whatever it is we like to call magnetism, where we realize that quite a goodly percentage of people will fall for or become involved in or be drawn towards this specific individual, pretty much like iron filings inevitably are drawn to a magnet. They can't help themselves, they're just drawn. There's something that is a center of power that pulls them from wherever they are, or whatever they are, towards itself. And this, on the whole, I think we could say is a magnetic power. But what is a magnetic power? We can say that it is some center of some kind of force that draws towards itself. But is this necessarily good? Is it necessarily bad? Is it perhaps both, depending on who has it? And just what is it? Often we've looked at other human beings. I'm sure we've all done this at some time or other. And we have said, well, this person is sweet, loving, spiritual. They lack something. They lack magnetism. Though we've not been sure what we even mean by this, but they lack it. They seem to be a blah, a sort of empty something when it comes to being able to draw attention or attraction to itself. And there are other human beings who walk around thinking, well, I haven't got what it takes to draw people to me or draw him or her to me. And they usually are not very, what we like to call, magnetic. Though sometimes they are and don't not. And though some type of attraction exists, they refuse to recognize it. So you see, you have a situation where there's a condition that we call being magnetic, or being able to draw others or certain types of others to ourselves because of whatever this is that we mean by magnetic. We have this condition, and yet we're not quite sure what it involves. I think that we ought to clarify it together in terms of tarot and in terms of the occult point of view in the Western mysteries, at least, so that we can agree together what we mean by being magnetic, even though we will also naturally draw on other fields of thought, ideas, and attitudes, so that we can compare the point of view we will be holding here during this talk as against the point of view others may have, to see where they come together and where perhaps they don't. Now, as I mentioned, certainly the idea of magnetic personality would involve a personality that draws other people to itself. I think that none of us would remotely want to argue in relation to that, because we inevitably consider that some human being has a magnetic personality if that human being has the ability to attract other people, their thoughts, their feelings, to themselves in various ways. You have what we can call the super salesman. Now, a super salesman could never be a super salesman unless that individual had a magnetic personality. Because being a super salesman means that other people are drawn into your thinking and feeling, and they accept what you want them to think and feel, and therefore they buy your product or go in for whatever it is you're selling. I think we should agree to that. So that super salesman could only become this because they would have whatever we mean by a magnetic personality. Now, a super salesman might have a terrific magnetic personality in relation to sales, and yet leave the opposite sex cold. So that a magnetic personality does not necessarily mean that it is able to attract in any or all areas. Some people might have a magnetic personality, that is, be able to draw other human beings into their sphere of influence in one area and be utterly unable to even remotely touch them or influence them in another, or shall we say at least most people. Though always there is some who can influence some under special conditions. So that I think when we talk about a magnetic personality, it would be a good idea for us to agree that it is a personality, or that is, a center of expression, that apparently has the ability to influence a certain sphere beyond itself, to influence it into its own kind of thinking, feeling, or doing, whether it be temporarily or permanently. It is still doing it at whatever time it is exercising itself. We could therefore say that a magnetic personality is really a matter of a certain kind of power. That is, when we talk of magnetic personality, it's a certain kind of power. Now then, what do we mean by power? Here again, we should come to an agreement. Power is the ability to, come on, honey, you don't have to stand there, just come sit down. Power is the ability to impress your own thinking, feeling, doing, or ideas or attitudes as to what your thinking, feeling, or doing would be upon another or others. Some of us, say, might have power over one person, but not have power over anybody else. Some of us might have power over many people, and yet have no power at all over our personal relationship areas. In other words, what we want or are trying to impress will not work out, whereas they may work out in other fields. And yet, certainly, magnetic attraction does and must involve a power. In the physical universe, it's definitely been seen that wherever you have types of atoms that are missing a specific electron, when this atom comes into the vicinity of another atom that has one too many electrons, that is, for balancing of the positive nucleus at the center and the negative charge, it is a charge of positive and negative, comes across an atom that has an extra electron there that it can live without, it reaches out and it grabs it and pulls it into its own orbit And by reaching out and grabbing and pulling it into its own orbit, the electron from some other atom, it becomes stabilized. Therefore, we might go along, and if we want to use this analogy, we could say that a magnetic attraction is the ability to pull, say, an electron or something else out of a different orbit and pull them into our own orbit, whether that be our way of thinking or feeling, or usually it's a combination. And so, if we analyze these ideas, we can see that magnetic attraction involves not only the power, but the desire to influence something or someone or others beyond whatever it is that we think or feel is our immediate sphere. For example, people who have power drives and work on developing these power drives certainly would have no success at all, except that they are concentrating on bringing about an influence, that influence being towards their power drives. In the same way, some people who have drives in the opposite area, not exactly opposite from power, as a matter of fact, but more, say, drives that have to do with a desire to bring love or kindness or help to another. Now, what we don't realize is that this is just as much of a power drive, though it looks like something else. In other words, if we have a desire to help someone else, what we want to do is charge that someone else with our power. Meaning what? We want to draw them into the orbit of our influence, like the magnet inevitably draws the iron filings, in order to make them line up around our magnetic rays of influence, just as on the physical plane. You can see this occurring with a magnet and a material that is attracted to this magnet and therefore can't help itself. So that the ability to attract into one's own desires as well as decisions, the forces of others, certainly is involved with magnetic attraction. Now, is this bad? No. Is this good? Yes. Can it be used for evil? Yes. Can it be used for good? Yes. You getting the idea? Now, to have magnetic attraction or personality, this is vital. But you will see magnetic personality, you will see a magnetic attraction in many human beings who are not remotely evolved enough to use this power in a way that we consider the spiritual way of life. That is, in a way that always considers the welfare of the other human being, in a way that is full of understanding, of discrimination, of wisdom. You will see people who have this power, but who use it mainly for vainglory, self-glorification. You will see people who have this power who use it to attain to control of others via the money methods, that is, become rich, and then you have power over others, or gain control, whether it be in a business area or in a relationship, gain control. And the having of the power, therefore, has nothing to do with whether this power is going to be used for good or evil. Now then, what is it that gives us the ability to have this power? I hope we've come to realize that this power is something we must have. Because if we are evolving into self-conscious centers for the one life, this requires an ability to influence the substance of the one life, to influence the environment that we are in, and we influence this substance and this environment to the degree that we gain a truly strong center of our own individualization, or I. Now, we come to a point in our evolution where in the development of the strong center of I, we feel completely separated from everybody else. And it's like me against everything. We have no real deep conception at that point when we're developing our complete individualization as a self-conscious center for God. We have no idea that this is something that is of God, with God, and for God, or the one life. Because we, in order to experience self-consciousness at all, we have to rather feel separated away from that which is actually growing this center. And in this separation, we develop inevitably on the deeper and in the deeper levels of our consciousness this feeling of insecurity, because somewhere in the depths of our soul is the remembrance that once we were secure and one with the all, but there was no self-conscious knowledge of this. It was just, I am one with all with me. There's no difference. There's no knowledge of there being an awareness of anything except I, all. I, beginningless, endless. But in this compression of the substance or essence of the life force, the gradual development of self-consciousness became able to start expressing itself and becoming aware of itself only because its consciousness was able to say I self as against others not self. And this exercise of I as against, is an inevitable part of the evolution towards becoming a true human soul. So that we have all gone through this. And the point of complete individualization for every single center of life is the point where that compression of the divine substance comes to a point where it only knows itself as I because of the fact that everything else is not I. And in a way, the best kind of analogy that can be given to help understand this is if you will look at tarot key number 10 there, you see this circle. Think of the top of the circle as the beginning of the compression of this infinite substance of God within an area of the all-self and consciousness. And as it comes downward, or that which is called involution, it is getting more and more away from the knowledge and realization of what it is in totality. If you think of it from the top of the circle, it's an analogy, remember, but it gives the idea, and I've used it often, but we use it always in different ways. Now, as one is coming down then into involution as a part of the Most High, the eternal self, this coming down becomes what? It becomes an awareness of getting more and more lost or away from that total knowledge of selfhood which we have. And in essence, this involution is more like taking the all ecstasy or all I, all beingness of the Most High, and gradually putting it through this portion of selfhood, which isn't broken away, mind you. It's more like compressed within the one thing, like a whirlpool within an ocean. And it brings it into more and more compressions going downward, pretty much like involving itself first in the atomic structure of life, which is a condensation of its selfhood, and then on into the development of the elements and the compounds and the chemistries, and then finally into that portion which is what we call living organisms, but from the smallest, the most primitive, on into the more and more complex, so that if you look down, say, towards 2/3 of that circle going downwards on the involutionary scale, you might say that the creature that says, I, cat, because everything experiences itself as I, there's one I, but it is an individualization. And at that point of the line, or the ray, of that one central being, say at 2/3 of the way it might feel itself as I, cat. And a little on, maybe I, gorilla. Well, some of us act like gorillas, so they're really quite gentle on the whole, I hear. I, baboon. We're still not self-consciously oriented, though we're going towards it. In other words, there's more and more of a compression of more and more of the substance of God to develop an area of expression of its own selfhood, so that it knows that I am I, and develops a power over this substance consciously that is taking place from that larger sphere of being. Now you get to the bottom of the circle. There's the top, say, now remember this is analogy, that there's the top that says I, the all. Now when you get to the bottom, you're as far from the awareness of who and what you are as you can be, at the very bottom of that circle. And so at the very bottom of that circle, you can say this is where complete individualization takes place, thinking of it in terms of the spiral circles of life itself, physically as well as spiritually. It's all one, with its different vibratory levels of expression. So that to get to the bottom of the circle means that one has developed that complete sense of I that is separate from everything else. And this is why you see human beings acting like what we consider monsters, because they are at the point of complete separation from realization that they are one with all life. And this is a necessary part of the total evolution. Now, by getting to this point, though, they are developing a strong center of I that is going to be eternal once it has gone through the rest of the growth process, that is, of returning back to the total one, the divine self, the I, and taking with it this sense of unique individualization, which every single one of us have gone through and are going through and will go through, taking with us this development, but at the same time returning to the awareness of who and what we are and have been at all times, and also realizing that this very sense of separation is inevitable and was inevitable in order to bring about a strong center that cannot be smashed. And remember how often a center of consciousness gets smashed. It seems to, anyway. When people become insane, when they fall into all kinds of psychic traps, when they get caught up in the occurrence of consciousness of others and think it's their own, they're not holding their own center of unique individuality and violate. Not that we can help touching each other's consciousness, nor should we want to, but what we've got to do is learn to realize that we are strong within our own center and our own uniqueness, and to the degree that we become aware of the miracle and strength of our own center of being, to that degree can we afford to let in the other consciousnesses, being able to differentiate and to mingle and grow and return to the unity, but not in the same way, because this is then an evolved center of self-awareness, which is really the essence or the cause for the expanding universe, incidentally. Consciousness or God taking centers, compressing in order to become self-conscious aware with all the extra creative powers that are involved, and then expanding back out, but holding that unique individuality which can never get lost. Never, not only on God's green earth, but God's entire universe and beyond. Therefore, the idea of magnetism, we're back there now, the idea of personal magnetism really involves and holds the basic principle of how strong is this center of individualized consciousness at this time in its radiations, where it can reach out and grasp and pull back to itself. In other words, reach out and influence, and in this influence bring back to itself the repercussions of this influence. Remember that, the repercussions of this influence. Now, if we're out for self-glorification, the repercussions will, of course, be most karmically painful in time. If we're out for power over others, if we have ego mania in our nature, we will, of course, be out using the center of magnetic force. And this magnetic force is what? A center of self-consciousness, evolved and powerful. Powerful. And reaching out, experimenting with its powers. And to the degree that we're still down to at the very bottom, to that degree will our experiments be adverse towards others, percentage-wise. And we will be out then to run other human beings, to order other people's lives around, to impress others with our own importance. We will become indignant that others do not see that we are the marvelous, the perfect, that what we say should go. We will become infinitely hurt at the betrayal of others because they didn't do and feel exactly as we thought they're supposed to in relation to us. And yet all of this is, God bless you, the center of our selfhood testing its powers like a child testing its powers. And we all have it to some degree or other. But as we continue traveling up this path of evolution then, we start, remember, going back towards an awareness of the unity of that which we are. We start realizing that there's nothing we can think or feel or do that doesn't influence another and others, and indeed all life and every single particle of life throughout the beginningless and endless universe. We start back up then towards awareness of who and what we are, as we have this I in relation to the total universe, which means also in relation to the deity that has grown, is growing, and is really the center of our being, because there is none else, and there is nothing else, which doesn't mean we're not individual in it. But we take then this individuality, and we start back up towards the aspects of love, of unity, of responsibility, and all the qualities that we can think of as being qualities of the more highly evolved being, as against the one who's willing to murder, kill, steal, betray, or anything in order to gain the personal benefits, to hell with the other person or group or things. And yet remember, this magnetic center means that a human being has developed a very strong aspect of selfhood. Now, when we walk along through life and we meet various people and we say somebody is or isn't magnetic, what does it mean, basically? It's very hard to be too dogmatic about this, because there are some people, for example, who have reached towards spiritual aspiration because of various pains and so on. And they have it sincerely and truly. Nevertheless, even though they have been reaching towards spiritual aspiration, they are trying to do this at the cost of their own center of power and action within the sphere or the garden of their own personal lives. And so in a way, you might say that they are slightly off balance at the moment, though life will bring them back. And therefore, if they are not acting magnetically in their particular environment, it can be that they're merely in a cycle where they're reaching towards one portion of realization before they'll be able to incorporate it into more of the personal sphere. But remember, in Western occultism, the one thing we keep saying, we have to conquer our environment, the material universe. This is our destiny. And by conquering our environment, our material universe, we are saying in essence that we have to be reaching for the understanding, recognition, and realization of who and what we are, and at the same time testing this recognition and realization within our environment in order to have more influence on our own unconscious thinking and feeling first, and then emanating what we think and feel to the rest of life, whatever part of life is willing to take it. We do not force our thinking, feeling on anyone, but we have a strength of emanation which is received by those who are open to, or shall we say magnetically attracted to our level, our richness of thinking, feeling in many and in various ways. Then, having come to this realization that not only must we keep working on growing ourselves, because once you have complete self-consciousness, no one else is going to grow you. That is when you become responsible for your own evolution. And that's God in you that's taking over experimentally to push. It isn't so much experimentally, but you might say to deliberately expose its own centers to the various situations that will make them grow, become aware, wake up, and use these powers. Because what's the use of having a baby, for example, if you're not going to help that baby to grow up and then take on responsibility for his or her own life and experiences? Isn't that right? And in the same way, once we have achieved this individuality, the responsibility for growing our powers and testing where they will bring us pain or sorrow and where they will bring us joy and fulfillment has to do with returning back to a center that is a realization that love does guide the universe. And the magnetic personality that really affects the largest number of people is inevitably the type of personality that has this double development. Number one, a sense of strength and security in its own individuality and uniqueness. A knowledge that nothing can break it. It is strong to withstand the heavy tide. It knows it inside. Not that it wants to suffer, but it knows it can withstand all kinds of conditions and situations. Knowing this, it can then, from its own center, start radiating out like the sun holding the planets in its electromagnetic attraction in place. Having this center of sureness of the strength of our I, our soul, we then reach out more and more. We emanate out, and we emanate real force, actual force. We emanate out and we touch more and more human beings, living creatures. We touch them with this center of that which we are. And how we touch them and for what purposes we touch them, this is what determines what will occur to us, incidentally, because your equilibrium of the universe is such that once you develop this sureness of the center of your eye, and if you reach out to touch in order to gain self-glorification, power over others, to force other people to think or feel as you do, what occurs then is that this magnetic attraction that you have and power that you have, everything goes back and turns in circles, as you know. It hits back, always. It always hits back. And this really is what brings on so much suffering and pain. And the more highly evolved we are, the more subtle our tests, the more pain we will be prone to, and yet all of this is good, because we have to learn how to so revere this center of power, this magnetic type of influence that we automatically have when we have this very condensedly evolved center of eye. We have to learn how to use this in accordance with the universal principles, so that when a baby is learning how to walk, we will not be stupid and grab it up every time because it might fall and bruise itself. We have to learn how to use our power, and it isn't easy, because we all inevitably make mistakes out of nothing but plain, shall we say, good intentions. And you've heard the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Good intentions are not enough on the path towards God. They certainly are not enough. No matter how good your intentions, stick your finger in the fire and find out what happens. Good intentions are not enough, though they are essential. We have to also learn what it is we are doing with our powers unconsciously. And it is in our unconscious thinking and feeling, it is in our self-rationalizations that we bring tremendous havoc upon ourselves and others, because we do influence others. How often have some of us, for example, interfered in someone else's intimate life or marriage, and by the doing deliberately stirred, influenced, and started an action going that we had no right to? You know, I know a lovely young lady who is really a most extraordinary, superior young lady indeed. And she married a man who I would say was very inferior to her, and everybody else would have said so too. Now, within this marriage, he started to suffer the repercussions of his ego, his ambivalence. He had a great deal of ambivalence towards the opposite sex, having had an alcoholic mother. He fell into this pattern. And so he treated his wife, this lovely young lady, in a way that was really quite shameful. And she had stimulated certain insecurity complexes, which incidentally everybody's got. All it needs is the right condition to stimulate it. So naturally, it got stimulated. And anyone who looked at the situation would certainly say she should walk out on this man. Well, an outsider can say anything. And the parents got indignant enough to try to get her to walk out on this man. And she was, shall we say, strong enough in her center of I, or ego, that she didn't permit it. In fact, there was even a nice wild street scene where he waved a gun because she'd flirted with another man across the street. And the police were called. I mean, here you see a situation that's almost insane. And actually the parents came running, and they wanted to take very strong, violent action. And this young lady said, look, this is my life. It turned out she was very proud of the fact that he was willing to go so far to save his marriage as even to wave a gun around and kick the other fellow in the ribs, breaking one or two ribs. She was rather proud of this. So, what would have been accomplished? Suppose the parents had taken this young lady, beautiful and kind and sweet, a very fine spiritual type, really, and said, okay, now you're not staying with this monster. Come on, you and your children. We're taking care of you. Would this have been helping them? In other words, this magnetic force, which we can push out upon others. Now, the parents could have done this, incidentally, if they'd have worked hard enough. They could have pulled, that is, we think so. You never know, though, do you, till you try it. But they could have utilized their power, their magnetic powers, to, pull this child out of the situation or condition. And what would they have accomplished for this child? They'd have just stopped her from finding out what in her nature made it necessary for her first to be magnetically attracted to the qualities in the husband that gave her these experiences. They would have stopped her from finding out what she has to develop in herself and go to work to develop them to become more secure within her own inner being. They'd have stopped her evolution cold. You see what we mean about the use of magnetic power? Now, in this case, it wasn't used. I mean, an attempt was made, and then it was drawn right back when it was noticed that actually there was a secret delight in the drama of the situation for that stage of their growth. Now, we've got to keep in mind with ourselves, then, at all times, the development of a magnetic center where we influence others becomes almost automatic when we work with tarot. Why? Because every one of these tarot keys are stimulating the powers of our own consciousness. And they are rehabilitating our consciousness into an awareness of what we are in terms of changing the identification from the personality to the higher self. And this doesn't get rid of the personality. It just means the personality becomes that much more powerful because the consciousness is bringing in a larger idea, and automatically you're drawing in power from the universe, both physically as well as spiritually, mentally, and emotionally. Automatically, tarot enhances your center of consciousness. That's why automatically things happen to you, because you become more of a magnetic center. And that which you're holding as in immature ways, that comes at you and is good, because that forces you to wake up and start changing, gaining control, using your magnetic power more and more positively in terms of your true aspiration. So that every bit of use of tarot, which should never be stopped, you never are through with it. You may have so many cycles of use in the lessons, but you should never stop using it to the day you drop your physical body and go to the astral. Then you won't stop using it if you're smart. Because working with these principles and images automatically starts giving us stronger and stronger centers of magnetic influence on others. And how we use it, and in what way we use it, and whether we use it to enhance our own personality, though we may often call it by all kinds of names. It's just like there's a principle in therapy that few people are aware of. That's called reverse. What is that again? Reverse projection. It's a type of reverse projection. And whereas the patient almost always projects his or her need on the therapist, whether it be in psychological or spiritual aspects of therapy, where there's an individual that's involved. Just as often as not, the therapist gets caught up magnetically in the subconscious flow and thinking and feeling of the patient. And that's where you really have trouble. You develop then what's called an attraction or an infatuation, which is always called love, by the way, by the people involved. And on this undercurrent level, there's been a magnetic attraction that's taken place where instead of the therapist magnetically influencing the other individual to become a self-conscious center, of individualized power and control, and to face the problem and grow out of it, they get caught into the problem, and then they're liable to do what these parents tried to do with this young lady who had the husband waving the gun all over the lot. They didn't try hard enough. They woke up soon enough. In other words, the therapist can get caught up, and often does, into the subconscious flow of the patient, and then thinks and feels. In other words, the magnetic power has reversed itself, and the patient turns out to be stronger than the therapist. And what you have is what's often called a negative attachment that will end in disaster because of the loss, the being pulled in magnetically. And I'm aware of these things. I've watched this occurring on the inner plane so often. In meditation, suddenly some other center of consciousness that doesn't even know whether it's coming or going, it's just floating around, gets pulled in because somebody is meditating. And if one isn't aware of these forces, that can be a lot of trouble. Things like obsession. I mean, monkeying with consciousness is a serious thing at any time. Unless you're aware of all sorts of things and know exactly what you're doing every step of the way. But here, as I show you, even in our modern psychological practices, you have this reverse flow. Whenever you hear, for instance, of psychiatrists and psychologists who are continuously getting involved in love affairs with the young ladies that are supposed to be the patients, they're always getting caught up in this reverse projection, you see. They haven't got their center of consciousnness as strongly developed as they think. And so they start reacting as though they were the other person. And they develop this, you might say, the compulsion to be and do what the other person does. Now, we do this all the time with ourselves, with each other. We do it with our husbands and wives and friends and sisters and brothers. We are caught up in the magnetic power of somebody else's subconscious flow of being. And we react then as the other person will. I know one man who kept giving every excuse for his wife's being an alcoholic that she gave. And he didn't realize that he was caught up in her subconscious flow magnetically, because she had such an intense subconsciousness, and he was very, shall we say, psychic and intuitive, and it was easy for him to be captured then without his knowing that this is it, because these people feel it as their own thinking and feeling. That's why you've heard me warn you over and over again. All thoughts and emotions that come to you that you don't like, just say they're not your own. Refuse them. Even if they come from some pattern within you, refuse them. That way you change them by instilling new ones. And more often than not, you're caught up in the magnetic flow of another. Now, to the degree that you discover and work on knowing who and what you are, to the degree that you align yourself with the higher powers, the divine will, to the degree that you are willing to let your personality be an instrument and not have to make it be some kind of super Hamlet prancing around with everybody bowing down to it, to the degree that you start seeing the difference, to that degree will your personality pulse with power more and more on the positive levels, so that the repercussions will be something you will invite because they'll be glorious. The power of love brings back love. The power of respect for another person's uniqueness keeps you from being entrapped by other human beings' need to have power over you. The power to want to live a rich, positive, creative life without having to have others kowtow or bow to you, is the power that will give you these abilities and capacities, and give it in such a way that you enrich the one universe with your uniqueness. And who needs to have power over others? And who needs to have others kowtow and accept their ideas and emotions as sacrosanct, except those who are still playing with their powers and need to get into trouble and reap the repercussions of their trouble, to know who and what we are, and to act from that level and be willing to let that level live us. Develops in us a magnetic power so fantastic that sometimes it can almost frighten us. We'll start running like heaven to protect ourselves from being involved everywhere, wherever we go. Because just like the magnet with the iron filings, people will be drawn. They'll want to bathe in the light of our magnetic being because they will know they're safe. And they'll want to bathe in our essence because they'll know all that will happen to them is enhanced love and a continued freedom of their own soul to grow in that love and expression. So you see, magnetism has a lot more meaning than we thought. I could give you 1,000 classes on it, but don't worry, I won't. And we're going to be taking up a good portion of the ideas on magnetism through this class I'm giving anyway. So, when you leave today, anyway, remember that you are already a very highly evolved self-conscious center of the one life. You're human, and you're an aspirant. This in itself shows it. Know this. Charge your own realization with this, and then you'll be able to walk amongst others radiating, instead of feeding yourselves the nonsense about you're unhappy and you're betrayed or you're sad and or if you're full of fear, you're going to lose this and you might not lose that. Charge yourself with the magnetic power of the positive center of glory. And when you look at everything that you look at, when you watch the golden sun, when you listen to the whispering leaves on the trees, remember it's that magic center of eternal I in you, that magnetic center of God that has this awareness, and bless it and love it and fill yourselves with ecstasy towards it. And when you meet other people, think and remember that that's what they are too. And revere this uniqueness. Love it. Even if you don't like them personally, love their uniqueness. And you'll be amazed at what will start to happen with you more and more on the magnetic levels. And it's happening already. God bless you. Blesses you anyway, but it's nice to say it. Is the recipient of every habit pattern, remember, does not respond to anything except pictorial imagery, nor does it respond to it by just giving it a vague one. And to hold a pictorial image on our own, in other words, shape one and hold it on our own, is not as specific and definite as it is to have a very organized pictorial images which speak the language of what subconscious is to begin with. Our psychologists have found that everyone who dreams anywhere in the world dreams in the same pictorial images, even though you have your extra tassels and decorations and fringes, for the specializations of your groups and cultures. Your underneath vital pictorial images are the same. And the study of the transmutation of patterns to release our energy from patterns we should have outgrown and bring them into what is positive and proper for the now to keep growing. These patterns are known. The tarot keys represent the full stage of evolutionary levels for the pictorial imagery, giving the positive impact. So that when we can learn, which we do receive the lessons at home, and then we receive the extra work here through the classes and services. When we learn how to immediately understand when we're reacting to a habit pattern that we should not be responding to anymore. We can also then learn how to very rapidly, if we want to enough, you have to want, we can change these emotional habit responses by grabbing the proper tarot keys once we learn which is which. We can learn how to become alive, how to stop walking around with our head in the clouds, brooding, full of moods and full of illusions and delusions, more through nature per se.